And this is the last time I'm going to say it. You have to kill Eileen Walsh because she'll kill again.
For some of us, death is not a punishment. Living is not a punishment.
Remorseless serial killers are forced to face the consequences of their actions as they await execution. In their final interviews, we delve into the complexities of their minds and identify the factors that led them down a dark path. These are the 10 last interviews with serial killers before execution.
Your discretion is advised.
Number 10. Carol Cole.
Are you sorry?
For the victim?
Yes.
Yes. Especially the one that was the 11-year-old girl way back in 1967.
That was the final interview of Carol Cole, minutes before he was executed by lethal injection for perpetuating 35 murders. May 9th, 1938. Cole was born in Sioux City, Iowa. He lived with both parents and a younger sister. And like many serial killers, Cole's path to becoming a mass murderer began at a very young age. After his father left to fight World War II, Cole's mother started having affairs with dozens of men. By this time, the family had relocated to California, and let's just say her beauty was sought after by the rich and wealthy bosses of the Golden State. Inside the house, Cole's mother abused him and threatened to harm him if he ever told his father about her rendezvous with these men. On top of that, she dressed him up as a girl for school, prompting his classmates to laugh and bully him. These acts troubled Cole, and one day he unleashed his anger on a classmate named Dwayne by drowning him in a lake. The authorities ruled Dwayne's death an accident, and his death brought Carol Cole's evil side to life. Between 1960 and 1963, Cole checked in and out of different mental hospitals. A doctor at one of the hospitals noticed something unique about Cole, and that was the way he associated with women. In the doctor's words, he said,
Cole seems to be afraid of the female figure and cannot have intercourse. You must kill her before you can do it.
And let's just say this doctor made a critical evaluation of Cole's behavior. Half of all of his murders were women, and it seemed like he had a diabolical fantasy of killing them before making love. Maybe it was because of his troubling childhood, with how badly his mother treated him, we can't say. But after a couple of months, Cole moved to Texas, where he met and married an alcoholic stripper named Billy Whitworth. Yeah, he was a killer at this point, and marrying this woman pushed Cole's mind one step further into the abyss of madness. She made him dislike women even more, resulting in him killing the one victim he truly regretted till he died, an underage girl.
Thought about it and condemned myself for many years, because I can just imagine what her life might have been like.
He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her death, and by the time he came out, he was a different beast. He killed 14 women in the span of 9 years, with the most painful one being the murder of Marie Cushman in 1979. He met Marie at a bar in Las Vegas, took her to a motel, and strangled her to death. However, the hands of justice finally caught up to him when he was tied to the murder of 3 women killed in Texas. April 9th, 1981. Cole was convicted of all 3 murders committed in Texas. He was sentenced to life at the Huntsville prison, but after the death of his mother in 1984, he agreed to fresh murder charges filed against him in Nevada. He was then extradited to that state and given the death penalty in October 1984. During the interview, Cole was allowed to smoke a cigar, and he looked pretty calm for someone about to be executed in a few minutes. He said he regretted the things he had done and truly believed he deserved to die.
Do you deserve to die?
For what I did, yes. I think I deserve to die.
December 6th, 1985. At exactly 2:01 a.m., Carol Cole was executed by lethal injection at the Nevada State Prison. And if you thought that was terrifying, this next one will leave you mesmerized. Number 9. Wesley Allen Dodd.
Why do you want to be executed? I have to be. I'm molesting kids nonstop since I was 13 years old. Anything happened, I can guarantee I'd do it again, and sooner or later I would kill another child.
January 5th, 1993. Wesley Allen Dodd was executed by hanging at the Washington State Penitentiary. But unlike most serial killers in denial, Wesley knew that if he wasn't executed, he would murder again. Born on July 3, 1961, in Toppenish, Washington, Wesley said in an interview that he was never abused or molested as a child. However, all through his life, the words "I love you" were never said to him. So, in some way, he felt neglected by both his family and friends at school. He never felt love until he discovered his sexual attraction to boys at the age of 9. By 13, Wesley would begin exposing himself to boys in a rather violent way, beginning with his younger cousins. He would touch them inappropriately, along with other kids in his neighborhood. Despite the countless reports made to both his parents and to the police, Wesley just kept escaping the law. And a large part of it was due to the fact that he didn't come off as a serious threat. He didn't display any abnormal behavior and was a pretty cool guy. But beneath the smiles and laughter, Wesley's love for boys got intertwined with his psychopathic intent to kill. September 4th, 1989, Wesley drove to Vancouver's David Douglas Park with a fish fillet knife and shoelaces, seeking to kill out boys. He lured two brothers, Cole and William Neer, to a secluded area, tied them to a tree, and performed inappropriate acts on both of them. When he was done, he stabbed him repeatedly with a knife and fled the scene. This is one of his earliest known murders, and it definitely wouldn't be his last. He went on to kill numerous boys in the most horrendous ways you could imagine. However, one last attempt to kill was all it took to finally apprehend Wesley and send him behind bars for his gruesome crimes. November 13, 1989, Wesley Allen Dodd drove to Camas, Washington, around 12 miles east of Vancouver, where he attempted to abduct a boy named James Kirk II from a restroom of the New Liberty Theater. What Wesley didn't know was that James Kirk wasn't like other kids. He was tough. When Wesley picked the boy up and tried running out of the theater with him, the kid fought back, kicking and punching in the air while crying out for help. This prompted security at the theater to stop him, but Wesley threw the boy on the ground, ran into his car, and drove off. And sadly, karma wasn't done with this guy because immediately after driving out of the theater, his car broke down, and the little boy's father caught up with him. Wesley was later reported to the police, leading to his confession of 3 different murders. He was then charged with aggravated first-degree murder in the deaths of the Neer brothers and another boy, Lee Azelli, plus attempted kidnapping of the boy at the theater. He pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to the death penalty. However, this is the point where things would take an interesting turn. Wesley was given 2 options: lethal injection or hanging. He chose to be hanged because he killed his last victim the same way and also felt he needed to die in a brutal fashion. During that final interview, he mentioned the fact that if he was a free man once again, he wouldn't stop killing and that death was the only punishment fitting his crimes. Wesley even went further to write a pamphlet on how parents could save themselves from killers like himself. In the interview, he seemed sad, and he knew he had a problem only death could solve.
How do you live with yourself daily? At times it's not easy. So there's times I think about what I've done. I think about some of the things the boys said before they died, and that's real hard to think about.
12:05 a.m. on January 5, 1993. Wesley was executed by hanging, the first lethal hanging in the United States since 1965. The autopsy report revealed he died within the first 2 to 3 minutes and without a broken neck, meaning one thing and one thing only. Wesley died even before the ropes could strangle him. He was ready for death.
Forward to die? In a way, yeah, I think it'd be a relief. I don't have to think about all these things anymore.
Number 8. Joseph Paul Franklin.
And it was just a really, bad thing to do to somebody, you know what I mean? I regret it very much and wished I could undo it.
June 8, 1980. Franklin waited on an overpass in Cincinnati, Ohio, to shoot the first racially mixed couple that walked by. He was a white supremacist, American neo-Nazi terrorist, and a serial killer who wanted to start a racial war in America. But on that cold night, 2 dark-skinned boys walked by, prompting Franklin to fire his rifle and mercilessly kill him. As bad as that sounds, these were just 2 of the dozen others Franklin killed in his bid to start a war. Born on April 13, 1950 in Mobile, Alabama, Franklin was born in a not-so-peaceful home. There was barely any food. and he was physically abused by his mother and siblings. As a teenager, he would join the white supremacist group, the Ku Klux Klan, getting inspiration to start a racial war. Franklin would travel from one state to the other, killing African and Latin Americans unprovoked. He would station himself at bus stops and parks, simply waiting for victims to pass by. July 29, 1977. Franklin firebombed the Beth Shalom Synagogue in Chattanooga, Tennessee, destroying it. Thankfully, many worshippers left early that day, and he was only able to injure a couple of people. And as we all pay close attention to this, we are very tempted to ask, why? Like, why would someone just want to start a war? Well, when asked this exact question during his final interview, Franklin had this to say.
Once I started doing it and showed them how, other white supremacists would do the same thing, follow suit.
Thankfully, that plan didn't work, and it just sent him on a fast path to the death penalty. By September 1980, Franklin had killed a total of 22 people, and there was a nationwide manhunt for this guy. He was known to visit blood banks and had conspicuous racial tattoos on his body. Then on October 28, 1980, Franklin was arrested on suspicion of perpetuating at least 6 murders in Florida. He was then diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and unfit to stand trial by a psychiatrist, but that didn't stop the government from putting him on death row until 2013, when it was finally time for him to be executed. Franklin's execution was delayed a couple of times, but on November 20th, 2013, he was executed by lethal injection. According to eyewitnesses, Franklin didn't display emotion. He didn't make any final written statement and did not speak a word in that death chamber. After the injection was administered, he blinked a few times, breathed heavily, and swallowed hard before he was confirmed dead. In his last interview, his final words were,
I believe I deserve everything that'll happen to me on November 20th. Yeah.
Are you scared?
No. I got my trust in God.
Number 7. Ted Bundy.
I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has. I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me, that's for sure.
May 6, 1975, Ted Bundy picked up a girl named Lynette Dawn Culver. He offered her a ride and ended up taking her to his hotel where he abused and drowned her in a bathtub. This was one out of the 33 different women Ted Bundy murdered. Born in Burlington, Vermont on November 24, 1946, Ted was a rapist and a serial killer. At first glance, Bundy looked like every girl's dream man. He had charming looks and held a degree in psychology from the University of Washington. But Ted had a dark and twisted mind that led him down a path of destruction. In his final interview, he would describe his obsession with sexual material and alcohol that led him down the dark path he found himself on. Bundy often employed charm to disguise his murderous intent when kidnapping victims, and extended this tactic with law enforcement, the media, and the criminal justice system to maintain his claims of innocence. He pulled off numerous killings by approaching females in public. They usually followed him to his car, where he would beat, restrain, and take him to a motel or someplace secluded to sexually assault and kill them. And to make things worse, he decapitated at least 12 of his victims, keeping their severed heads as mementos in his apartment. However, these troubling acts from Bundy didn't go unnoticed by law enforcement. In 1975, Bundy was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, Bundy engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults in Florida, including 3 murders before his ultimate recapture in 1978. For the homicides in Florida, he received 3 death sentences and 2 trials, and was executed at Florida State Prison in Rayford on January 24, 1989.
And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done.
What baffled most people about Bundy was how detailed he was when discussing how he murdered his victims. In his last interview, he talked about how he felt committing those murders.
Some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to, with a clear mind and all my essential moral.
However, the main focus of that interview was on the effect of sexual material, driving men in the real world to do the unthinkable.
I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. Every one of them deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography.
Number 6. Oscar Ray Bolan.
I'm at peace with myself. The state's about to kill me, and they think they're getting justice, and I'm like, well, they're not getting justice.
Oscar Ray Bolan was an American serial killer and convicted rapist, executed in Florida for the murder of 3 women. But unlike the other killers we've seen so far, Oscar believes he never committed those crimes.
So you're saying you didn't murder these women?
No,
Stephanie Collins? Terry Lynn Matthews?
no. I didn't know them. I've never seen them. Never met them.
Born on January 22, 1962 in Portland, Indiana, Oscar was physically abused as a child. His father used to beat him consistently, and his mother once walked him to a school bus stop on a leash. This set Oscar up for a life of crime. At 15, he was arrested for theft in Ohio, and then later moved to Florida to start a new life. However, things became worse for him. He became a carnival worker and also got married in 1983 to his then-girlfriend, Cheryl Hafner. But at the same time, he grew an obsession with murdering women. January 25, 1986, 25-year-old Natalie Blanche Holly, a night manager at a church's fried chicken restaurant in Tampa, finished work and locked up the store for the night with a colleague. She left the store around 1:30 a.m. and headed to her car. However, she would never make it back home, and her body was found hours later by a morning jogger. She was repeatedly stabbed to death. November 5, 1986. An underage high school girl named Stephanie Collins disappeared after finishing her shift at a drugstore. Her body was found exactly a month later wrapped in sheets and towels. She also had been stabbed to death with her skull crushed. Coincidentally, the same day Collins' body was found, 26-year-old Terry Lynn Matthews went missing. Her car was found outside a post office with the engine still running. Later in the day, her body was located in some woods, wrapped in a white sheet. Her throat had been cut, and she had been bleeped. So now how does this all connect back to Oscar Ray Bolan? Well, I'll get to it in a minute. In 1987, Oscar and 2 other men kidnapped and raped a waitress in Toledo, Ohio. Afterward, Oscar attempted to kill her with a gun, but the gun jammed, leading him to dump her on the highway. The waitress later identified Oscar as the major perpetrator of that, leading to his arrest and sentence to 22 years in prison. 2 years after his sentence, Oscar divorced his wife, Cheryl Hafner, but she remarried a few months later. She now told her new husband everything Oscar had told her concerning the numerous murders he committed. The new husband in turn called a tip line, implicating Oscar. That resulted in Oscar getting indicted on fresh murder charges as more witnesses would come out to testify against him, including his half-brother and a cousin. He was later sentenced to death for the murder of Collins and received a 3rd death sentence for the murder of Matthews.
Imagine spending 28 years in this room. There's no way to describe it. It's only difficult.
Oscar spent 28 years on death row and was finally executed by lethal injection. Before his execution, though, he had an interview with WTVT. He continued to claim he was innocent and had been framed.
Is Florida basically killing an innocent man?
Yes.
So you're innocent?
Absolutely innocent of the murder. I had nothing to do with it.
It's pretty easy to think he was, seeing how innocent and calm he looked. But don't be fooled, people. This man was a hardened criminal, and he got the justice he deserved. January 7th, 2016, Oscar Ray Bolan was executed.
I mean, there's many worse ways to go. At least I had the opportunity to say goodbye.
Number 5. Edwards, Wayne Edwards.
But no, I did not feel good about it, and I don't feel good about it now. Otherwise, why I would be asking for the death penalty.
Now, it's one thing to be a serial killer, but it's another to be one who loves notoriety. Ed Wayne Edwards is without a doubt one of the most evil people the world has ever known. Born on June 14, 1933 in Akron, Ohio, Ed was raised in an orphanage where he was physically and sexually abused by nuns. By the time he was old enough to leave, he had become a broken version of himself and engaged in all sorts of petty crimes. In 1955, Ed broke out of jail in Akron and began robbing gas stations around the U.S. The crazy part is, he did it without concealing his identity because he wanted to be famous. By 1961, he had accomplished that goal. He was famous for all the wrong reasons. Edward was officially placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, following his second prison escape. It's like the guy had a special death wish, or was just maybe insane at that point. Surprisingly, he was arrested for a third time, but got lucky to be granted parole just 5 years later. Now, when Edwards came out, he was a changed man. He got married, wrote a book, became a motivational speaker, and even appeared on 2 different TV shows. He was doing really great, but as the saying goes, old habits never die, and neither did Edwards.
The more trouble you get into, the bigger you are in their eyes.
Well, I want to tell you, you look like a pretty big man from over here. And thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Edwards, and thank you, gentlemen, also.
August 7, 1977, a man named William Billy Lavico and his girlfriend Judith Straub had been dating for 8 months when Straub's car was found in a parking lot with her purse and shoes inside. Families gathered and searched the next day for those bodies in the high weeds. There they found Lavico and Straub lying on the ground, shot at point-blank range with a 20-gauge shotgun. The perpetrator? You guessed it, Ed Wayne Edwards. 3 years later, he would strike again, but this time in a more cruel fashion. He stabbed and strangled 2 brothers to death, Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, in Burton, Ohio. But the one murder that earned him the death penalty was the murder of his foster son, 25-year-old Danny Boy Edwards. Why'd he kill him? One word: greed. Ed had killed Danny in a scheme to collect $250,000 of insurance money. Now, Danny was a soldier in the U.S. Army, but Edwards persuaded him to be a deserter, which he did. Then on a random day, Ed took him back to the woods near their family and shot him twice in the face, burying him in a shallow grave. The twist on this is Ed wasn't caught for this particular murder. Instead, his biological son, April Balacio, tipped off the police about another murder he had committed a long time ago. Why'd he do it? We don't know, but that was the moment Ed finally confessed to the police of all the murders he had committed, except that of his foster son. While he was awaiting trial, he confessed in a jailhouse that he killed his foster son, opening up a fresh case against him. He was found guilty and sentenced to the death penalty. In his final interview, he looked very old, and according to his statement, he chose the death penalty by lethal injection because his body was too weak and he was dying from numerous mental conditions. Edwards never got executed. He died a natural death 4 months before he could be executed. These are his final words in his last interview before his death.
I am not proud of any of this, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it for anybody to follow in my footprints.
Number 4. Michael Bruce Ross.
If it's anybody that deserves the death penalty, it's Michael Ross. And I think if you were to ask him, and he were to be truthful, he'll tell you himself that he deserves the death penalty.
Michael Ross, aka the Roadside Strangler, was an American serial killer who was executed by the state of Connecticut in 2005. Born on July 26, 1959, Ross was the oldest of 4 children, and his home was extremely dysfunctional. His mother would abuse all 4 children, with some close friends of his saying he was molested by his uncle, who eventually committed suicide. Nonetheless, Ross was a bright student. He graduated high school but was very antisocial. He would go on to attend Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, where he would stalk women in their dorms. In his last interview, he said he was sexually aroused by the thought of knowing they were scared of him. And during his sophomore year, he raped his first victim and eventually committed his first murder.
And then it got to the point where I actually raped someone at Cornell. And then the next person I actually been killed.
Between 1981 and 1984, Ross would murder 8 females, varying in all ages from Connecticut to New York. He raped 7 out of 8 victims before killing them. Eventually, he would be tied to a couple of these murders before confessing to all 8. He was convicted of 4 and sentenced to death on July 6, 1987, in Connecticut. He spent almost 18 years on death row before his execution. May 13, 2005, Ross was executed by lethal injection at Osborne Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut. He was 45 years old. Despite his regrets in the final days of his life, Ross did not request a special last meal before facing that execution, thereby dining on the regular prison meal of the day. Also, when he was asked if he would like to make a last statement, he said without opening his eyes,
"No, thank you."
In an interview, these would be his final words.
For some of us, death is not a punishment. Living is what the punishment is.
Number 3. John Wayne Gacy.
The man who committed what may be the crime of the century. His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing 33 innocent people and destroying hundreds of lives.
John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, played the role of a clown at children's birthday parties. And I think he embraced the personality of that because 13 years after pleading guilty and confessing to his crimes, he claimed he never knew any of the victims he murdered. Born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17, 1942, John Gacy would be a businessman by day and a haunting serial killer by night. In 1967, he sexually assaulted a boy and was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but only ended up serving 18 months before being released on parole. Some say it was because of his political connections, others say it was luck. But whatever factor played a part in his early release, John Gacy didn't stop murdering people. As a matter of fact, it made him take things to another level. He began inviting boys on the pretense that he had construction work for him inside his apartment. And once they got in, he would sexually molest them, torture him with a method of his that I'll talk about in a bit, and strangle him to death. Some of the bodies were buried in his basement while others were thrown into a river. Despite the many cases of boys going missing, no one suspected John for many years because he was a reputable businessman and also took up jobs as a clown for kids' parties. However, in 1978, his crimes caught up with him after he was arrested for the murder of Robert Peast, who lived in his neighborhood. During the investigation, the forensics team had identified body parts belonging to more than 10 different boys buried in his basement. He also tried disputing the technicality of how he murdered the victims, but no matter how much he tried, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty and sentenced to death in March 1980. He was placed on death row for 14 years before being executed with that lethal injection on May 10, 1994. During those 14 years on death row, John still kept denying ever knowing the victims. Number 2. Eileen Walsh.
Do you want to die? You want to?
Oh man, if I was to leave this planet, it wouldn't be no big deal to me, because this is a wicked, wicked world. Wicked world.
October 9, 2002, Eileen was executed by lethal injection in Florida. She acted as a prostitute along highways in Florida where she shot and robbed 7 of her victims in the process. Despite the fact that she was a serial killer, her story is one that is quite fascinating. February 29, 1956, Eileen Walsh was born in Rochester, Michigan. Her mother gave birth to her at 16 while her father was 18 at the time. Less than 2 months before Eileen was born, her mother also filed for a divorce, making Eileen never meet her father. Then when Eileen was 4 years old, her mother dumped her at her grandparents' house and ran away. These grandparents were alcoholics, further complicating Eileen's already troubling childhood.
She asked you for your forgiveness.
She can go to hell. She doesn't have any of my forgiveness. I don't even know her, don't even want to know her.
Then she got herself involved in sexual activities at school in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, and food. And outside of school, she would engage in these sexual activities with her brother. Her grandfather also sexually assaulted her, while a family friend sealed it off by getting her pregnant. A few months after her son was born, she dropped out of school and put him up for adoption. Then a year later, her grandfather kicked her out of the house, making her live in the woods near her old home, supporting herself through prostitution. Between the ages of 14 and 22, Eileen attempted suicide 6 times, including one time she shot herself in the stomach but didn't die. From there on, Eileen would commit different offenses, but was never particularly sentenced. Her first victim was a man named Richard Charles Mallory, whom she claimed raped and sodomized her after driving her to a secluded area for sexual services. She went on to kill 6 other men in the space of 12 months, and also claimed the police were aware of her murders, yet she wasn't arrested, at least not yet.
Did you know there was helicopters dropping down from the sky? Deputy sheriff with decoys picking me up 4 or 5 months before my arrest? It was covered up.
January 9th, 1991. Eileen was arrested on the pretext of an outstanding warrant. She went to trial on January 14th, 1992, was found guilty, and sentenced to death. Days before her execution, she released a statement that read,
I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance of keeping me alive or anything, cause I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again.
During her final interview, she tried making a point that the system had used her to kill those men while they profited off of it. Yet they threw her under the bus and did nothing for her.
You sabotaged my ass, society, and the cops, and the system. A woman got executed.
October 9th, 2002, Eileen would be executed by lethal injection. But before going into that chamber, her last words to the public were this.
Nick, this is the last time I'm gonna say it. You have to kill Eileen Walsh because she'll kill again.
And number 1, Arthur Shawcross.
Do you have any comprehension of the suffering that you've brought the families of the people that you've killed?
I don't have any remorse for some reason.
Arthur John Shawcross, aka the Genesee River Killer, is no doubt one of the most evil people to ever walk the planet. Born on June 6, 1945, Arthur was the first of 4 children. As a child, his mother would have incestual relations with him, which in turn would be passed on to his sister. Outside that, there was nothing too crazy about his childhood and teenage years. However, his evil side would come to life after he joined and was discharged from the U.S. Army. During that period, he got married to a lady named Linda, but the couple got divorced a few years later. Then he got involved in burglary and arson, earning himself a 5-year sentence at Attica Correctional Facility, but was released after 22 months. May 7th, 1972, he raped and killed his first known victim, a boy named Jack Owen Blake. After luring him into a wooded area in Watertown, Blake's body wasn't found until the authorities received a tip by telephone on September 5th of the same year. 3 days before this, Arthur also raped and killed a girl named Karen Ann Hill, who had been visiting his hometown that weekend. He was found guilty of both murders and handed a 25-year sentence. However, Arthur got lucky again. After 14 years behind bars, prison staff ruled that Arthur was no longer dangerous and could be given an early release. That right there might have just been the biggest mistake of their lives. March 1988, a year after his release, Arthur began murdering again, primarily targeting prostitutes, before his capture less than 2 years later. He was convicted of 11 murders and was held at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, where he was held until his death. November 10th, 2008, he died of a cardiac arrest. But before his death, he was granted an interview with a British reporter, Catherine English, for a documentary on cannibalism. These were his final words in that interview.
There's always a bad man in me. You never can get rid of it. He's behind a door somewhere. I'm trying to keep him there. I don't want to hurt nobody else.